It's no secret that transportation options that seek to make the world cleaner, greener, safer, smarter, and more equitable aren't necessarily ones that find favour across the full political spectrum. And while there are some genuinely significant moves being made in large parts of the world towards a more sustainable and equitable transportation landscape, the US government is systemically rolling back a number of previously enacted bipartisan policies with a net effect of doing the exact opposite. Just one day after we published our video on the split screen that is American politicians claiming EVs are too expensive and of little value to the average consumer while simultaneously supporting trillions of dollars spent on a war in Iran that is ostensibly about oil, we heard about a new bill making its way through the House of Representatives that would further gut EV support, roll back environmental protections and make America's roads less safe for everyone. A bill that ends NEVI, the National EV Charging Program, entirely, that kills the carbon reduction program, that hands every EV driver in America a new $130 annual tax, rising to $150 as early as 2033. A bill that removes the words historically disadvantaged community from federal grant law, and that eliminates the only federal program specifically designed to reconnect the neighborhoods that America's highways tore apart in the very first place. A bill named, with no apparent sense of irony, to celebrate America's 250th birthday. So what happens when the country that invented the highway system decides to tax its way out of the electric future? We're about to find out, and the outcome won't be pleasant. But as is always the case with bills making their way through the legislative process, you have a chance to get involved and make your voice heard. So today, I've got someone with me who can explain what the bill states in its current form, help us all understand what's at stake, and give you what you need to make sure your elected officials know that what's being proposed isn't a good way to celebrate 250 years of a country founded specifically to avoid the tyranny of the few on the rest of us. While a lot of what we've witnessed from the federal government of late has come in the form of quite broad, quite vague executive orders, the legality of which are under almost constant examination in the courts, today's video focuses on draft legislation that, should it be passed in its current form, will strip environmental protections, remove obligations to ensure transportation programs do not affect traditionally disadvantaged communities, and enforce unfair taxes on those of us choosing to use electric vehicles as our preferred form of transportation. Enter the Build America 250 Act, introduced in the House by Chairman Sam Graves, Republican of Missouri, and co-sponsored by Ranking Member Rick Larsen, Democrat of Washington. Notably, this is a bipartisan bill, which makes the rollbacks buried within it all the more striking. It's currently in committee and is expected to be marked up by the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee by the end of this week. We've obtained the full bill text, all 1,005 pages of it, and we wanted to speak with someone far better qualified than I to explain what it means for you. So joining us today is Ben Prohaska, Executive Director of the Electrification Coalition, a non-partisan, non-profit organization based in Washington, D.C. that has spent years advocating for the policies needed to accelerate EV adoption on the grounds that doing so is critical for America's economic security, national security, and public health. Ben has been with the coalition since 2013 and has served as its executive director since 2021. Ben, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Nikki, and I'm really excited to be here and chat with you a little bit today. And it's an interesting time to be working on transportation electrification in the U.S.
I wish we were discussing things at a nicer point in history, but I guess that is where we are right now. Tell me a little bit about the Electrification Coalition and what you do.
So some background on the Electrification Coalition, and I think it really is important for this moment that we are currently in. But the Electrification Coalition was started around 2008. And we wrote something called the Electrification Roadmap. And it was very early stage where there were very few vehicles available that were battery powered electric vehicles that could plug into the grid. But it was also at a time when oil dependency and the impacts that oil's monopoly has on our transportation sector were really prevalent. And so it was important to come up with a set of solutions where you could start to chip away at oil's monopoly on our transportation sector. And that led to creating this broad view of how do you accelerate the technology? How do you accelerate charging infrastructure? And that launched the organization. And so since then, we've been working at the cross section of policy at the local, state, and federal level. And then we also work on direct implementation programs that are designed to accelerate transportation electrification on the ground. And that's everything from fleet transition programs with cities across the country where we've been a global or a state national leader, to helping states consider their charging programs as they think through how to develop a charging network that's going to support transportation electrification so that anywhere a driver wants to drive, they have access to charging. And then that also in turn is something where we're doing it with different cross sectors. So we work with ports because they represent an important step in the medium duty, heavy duty, and then also in the commercial shipping sector. And so we've created a program called the Advanced Freight Partners Group, which is designed to bring together boats, trucks, and trains under one banner with the idea that they all have this opportunity to think about powering our transportation future differently. And then I'll end with, and sorry for a bit of a long-winded answer, but I mentioned at the very beginning that we are focused as an organization on the economic and national security impacts of oil dependency and the monopoly that oil has on our transportation sector. And unfortunately, the conflict in Iran has really brought that front and center. And so every time someone shows up at a gas pump, they now see we don't control our future when it comes to oil and gas prices. And so consumers face that. And I think it really helps better understand why EVs is about an industrial policy and not just about a climate policy that we can really focus on in the US.
And I think a lot of people respond when they watch videos on our channel and on other channels talking about the politics of EVs, and they say, oh, that doesn't affect me. Why are you bringing politics into it? EVs are bipartisan, which most definitely they are. But at the same point, groups like the Electrification Coalition that work really, really hard in Washington, D.C. and around the country, without organizations like yourselves, a lot of what we have come to expect as everyday rights for EV drivers just wouldn't exist, right?
Yeah. And I think, the thing that makes us different, and this is just more about like sort of why do we matter relative to lots of other groups doing great work, is we take a real big worldview on this. And so it is about this idea of we have an opportunity to diversify how we move in the US. And it is because of this oil dependency issue. And so when you plug into a grid, we control it, meaning we get to control the prices in a much greater way than we do oil and gas. The grid is diverse, it's domestic. And so it just helps us, diversify our transportation future. And that has never been more apparent than right now when the national average for gas prices is somewhere around $4.55 a gallon, versus electricity prices, which are much, much, much lower.
That's a really good kicking off point. As you know, we made a video earlier this week talking about the kind of the split screen between the cost of the war in Iran, which is ostensibly all about oil, and the previous attempts by the federal government to kind of rescind anything approaching equity and renewables in the transportation landscape and in the wider energy landscape. And what we are talking about today is the Build America 250 Act, which has just been submitted, right? So let's talk a little bit about that bill, where it is right now, and some red flags that the Electrification Coalition and some of your colleagues on Capitol Hill in other groups have noted.
Yeah, so it's the Build America Act that has been proposed, and it's the draft language that has been released. And so that is a pretty normal part of the process in Congress, is that leadership will release draft text, and then the full markup normally happens that next week. And so that's what we expect to happen as well, where there will be a full markup. And this is just on the House side. So it's important to note that this is just one step in the process. And the Build America Act is basically what the federal government uses to establish our transportation policy. And it's a multi-year bill. And so it creates multi-year funding. And so in the past, we've had examples like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which was passed, and that established benchmark funding for things like the Charging Fueling Infrastructure Program, and a number of other really important programs. And so it is our opportunity, as this is getting put together, to help make sure that Congress and consumers and businesses across the country recognize why this is a time to lean into electrification, not out of electrification, because it really does help solve this problem of oil dependency. And on the flag, so let me back up. It's going to be the House version. It's going to be the markup. Then there should be it'll go to full House vote, assuming it gets out of committee and it's approved by committee. Then there's going to be a sort of a analogous or similar version that gets drafted on the Senate side, and then basically they go through a full House and Senate version that would be go through reconciliation, which is where they kind of agree on the differences that might exist between the bills, or disagree, for that matter. And then they, potentially pass a full bill that goes to the president's desk for signing. However, we think this is probably going to end up taking through at least the end of the year, and maybe longer, because it is not a small bill, and it will require a lot of thinking about what are the impacts that are being designed in this multi-year funding package for transportation.
There are some very important things that I think that our audience are going to be keen to know about. The first of which is the proposed $130 tax on all EVs in the US, on top of whatever owners are charged at the state level. And that is going to dramatically affect the cost effectiveness of EV ownership, right?
Yeah, I mean, we care about several things that are in the bill, and we think are potentially problematic. So yeah, the tax on EVs is one of those, and it's at the wrong time when we're seeing close to record high gas prices. And this is an opportunity for us to finally take the steps forward to end oil's monopoly on our transportation system. The idea that we would establish a tax that on EVs that is at this level, is just really the wrong thing to be doing to consumers, to businesses, et cetera. And we do believe EV drivers should pay their fair share. They just shouldn't pay more than their fair share. And what's currently proposed, is more than consumers should be paying, more than businesses should be paying. Especially when we can plug into a domestic grid that's going to continue to give us ways to reduce the costs of transportation in the U.S., which is a really important thing at a time when a lot of consumers are struggling.
And that bill is going to go up as well. So it starts at $130 if it's passed as it currently sits. And then the fee will actually increase to $150 by 2033. Yeah. It also levies a fee on plug-in hybrids. And it smacks right back to the EVs don't pay enough argument, when at the same time, President Trump is floating the idea of a gas tax holiday.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a slightly broken record, but it is this idea of EVs should pay their fair share, not more than their fair share. We think something that's much more reasonable is around $90 on an annual basis at the federal level. And then, there's lots of states that have exorbitant fees and taxes on EVs. And so we just shouldn't be creating too much of a tax on EVs. And really, we need to come up with a bigger long-term solution for how we fund our roads, which is part of what the Build America Act is supposed to do, is provide that multi-year funding to support infrastructure.
Right, because we've seen, obviously, under President Biden, there was a lot of investment promised for federal roads and bridges and transportation systems in general. Some of that has already been withdrawn under the current administration. And as I understand it right now, basically the coffers will run dry by 2028 is the current estimate?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything, it's a big question mark as to what that estimate will be. But, we haven't seen any changes to the gas tax since probably the 90s as well. And so we've seen inflation creep up. We've seen, even internal combustion engines have gotten more efficient. So it makes sense that there's less money in the system. And frankly, the idea that a tax on EVs is going to actually solve any of this is, an exercise in futility. And so that's why we agree EVs should pay their fair share, but just not more than their fair share. And we need to also think about a holistic solution for how we think about the future of road funding overall. As a quick leaping off point, there's two other kind of key provisions. There's many that we care about. One is that it would end the funding for the NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. And this is at a time when we've really made incredible strides to build out infrastructure across the country, but we're not done yet. The job isn't done. And states have already done a ton of planning. They're ready to go. So that's also a bad thing that this bill would do. And then it would also basically and the CFI program, the Charging Filling Infrastructure Program, which is more about urban centers, the sort of densification of transportation electrification charging. And so those are two other parts of the Build America Act that are going the wrong way, especially when you put it in the context of global competition, right, happening with gas prices.
And we're also seeing that there are provisions in the bill to effectively ban electric HGV, Class 8 big rigs, call it what you will, infrastructure from receiving federal funding, right?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't ban, just to be clear, it doesn't ban infrastructure for those. It's just whether or not the funding can be used for those programs or for those vehicle types. And, Class 8 vehicle or Class 8 trucks in the U.S. are a big part of our oil demand. Diesel prices right now are astronomically high. And this is at a time when we're starting to actually see Class 3 through 8 vehicles. So basically the vans that are in your neighborhood that drop off packages, Class 3 vehicles, right, all the way up through semi trucks, Class 8. And they're electrifying at a pretty quick rate. And we have incredibly interesting technology that's coming out through Tesla, major strides that have happened through other major OEMs. So another example of going the wrong direction on how do we electrify our transportation future and really protect consumers from oil price volatility and oil's monopoly on our transportation system.
Right. I mean, if you're in Southern California and you happen to be in the Inland Sea area, there are many electric Class 8 trucks now being used in drayage duties, in medium and longer haul operation. Greenlots just expanded their charging provision for electric semis. Is it Greenlots or Green Lane? My brain is a little...
Yeah, Green
Lane. It's Green Lane. Green Lane has just expanded their charging provision into Texas. And that, again, has... it's a familiar story, right? A lot of the infrastructure funding that we're seeing is going into red states, the exact states that have voted for politicians who are now trying to either withdraw or significantly kneecap a lot of these forward-thinking policies.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying, and this is a big thing we need to do, which is we need to re-articulate the opportunity and the benefits of transportation electrification so that it is a bipartisan issue. And right now, we've just gotten caught up in partisanship and the idea that EVs don't meet the goals on both sides of the aisle. But this should be a goal that should be supported by every lawmaker across the country, whether at the federal level or at the state level, because it's about the rest of the world is going electric. And right now, the U.S., who has been a major part of the global automotive sector, is lagging behind. And so if we aren't doing things here at home to drive electrification forward, we are not only going to lose out on the global market and that long-term potential, but we're also, again, continuing to put our consumers and our businesses in the crosshairs of oil price volatility and the monopoly that oil has on our transportation sector.
Right. We'll have more of our discussion on the Build America 250 Act shortly, plus what it means for fans of cleaner, greener, safer, smarter, and more equitable transportation and energy. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how you can help us stick around to keep bringing you this kind of content. Unlike a lot of channels, we don't take big advertorial sponsorship deals, and frankly, if we did, I doubt we'd have the freedom to make videos like this one. Instead, we rely on our amazing community of supporters on Patreon, YouTube, Fluxer, Discord, Mastodon, and Ko-fi. And you can become one of them from just $1.50 a month. You'll find links down below if you'd like to join and help us out, plus links to our channels on the Fediverse and PeerTube, because we don't believe in paywalls. Now, back to our discussion with Ben Prohaska from the Electrification Coalition. So Ben, prior to our break, we were talking about, how a lot of the infrastructure changes that this bill proposes would have a bipartisan effect across the US. And while, the headline of reducing or not reinstating or not refunding NEVI beyond what's currently available and also having that EV tax, we've also got a lot of impacts to heavy freight haulage businesses, but also to low emission buses and to consumers all across the US. Let's talk about emissions requirements, because they are going to be dropped as well, right?
Well, the bill isn't specific to the emissions requirement. That's other things that are happening. So this Build Act is more about the ways in which you might support emissions reduction. And so the low-no program that you brought up, it's a zero and low-no program, and it's basically a fund that was designed to support the transition for transit buses across the country. So we have about 5,000 transit buses that operate in our communities. It was a great way to move forward on transitioning those buses to electric. And those, they're in my hometown already. They're in many locations across the country where there are already buses plugging into the grid and carrying people every single day, millions of miles to wherever they need to go. And so it's been a great program. It's been oversubscribed across the country, where communities have been super, super interested in finding resources to transition. And part of it's because for a local community that operates a transit system, this is going to be a way to save a ton of money over time. So the total cost of operation goes way down, but it's also certainty. So if I need to operate a bus fleet and I am charging people who get on my bus every day to ensure that we can meet those operational cost needs, it's really hard to do. And oil goes from, or gas or diesel goes up and down all the time, right? That's volatility. And that makes it really hard to operate a fleet like that. Well, if you can plug into the grid, you have much greater certainty as to what those costs are going to be on an annual basis. And so that makes transit systems much more efficient, not to mention, obviously, the emissions reduction potential.
And that's before we even talk about virtual power planting options for bus fleet operators in off-peak periods, before we talk about school bus fleets where they have that same potential, certainly during the school holidays, to operate as giant batteries to help with peak shaving on the electrical grid. And of course, another thing that just blows my mind about this proposed bill, we're running short on time, but let's just go through some of the big kind of red flags other than the ones we've already discussed. Talking about removing any reference to historically disadvantaged communities, which is kind of very much the playbook of the current White House and also current Congress. Talking about removing requirements for really in-depth analysis of the environmental impact of any proposed new road or infrastructure build-out, removing, the carbon reduction program, repealing that completely, getting rid of the climate resilience grant, so enabling communities who are in areas that could be affected by anthropogenic climate change, removing any funding for allowing them to build infrastructure that is more resilient. I should note, as part of that fund is still going to hold emergency money. So, if there's a tornado passes through and the road is ripped up, then there'll be funds to help that. But it won't allow communities to actively prepare to be disaster ready, which, that blows my mind. Getting rid of Vision Zero, getting rid of the idea that our roads can move towards a future where we have zero death on them. And also making it possible for trucks to get heavier on our highways, which, of course, will have a detrimental effect on the road surfaces, a detrimental effect on emissions fleet-wide. Is there anything good in this proposed bill?
I think, you mentioned a lot of things that are not things that necessarily the Electrification Coalition is working on or is going to be really pushing lawmakers on. I do think that at the end of the day, there are a clear set of things around undermining transportation electrification, and that's the thing that we're the most focused on. And so the bill needs to contain programs that are going to support the proliferation or the growth of the charging infrastructure network, because we live in a big country and we need to make sure that if and when people are driving electric, that they have the ability to go anywhere they want and find access to charging. And it really doesn't take that much, but it does take a little bit more than what we've got in the system right now. And then, we need incentive programs. We're in the early stage of the market. And so that's why some of the things like the Low-No program, or the Clean Air Mitigation Air Quality program exist, is that a lot of communities don't have a solution. If you're in the Salt Lake City basin right now, you might have exhausted any other opportunities to get air quality better, except for the transition to low or zero emission vehicles on your road. And so those programs historically have made incredible strides in accelerating transportation electrification and diversifying the way we power our transportation future. And that's what we really need to hope and work towards with lawmakers, is that they see a vision for this that is recognizing it should be a bipartisan issue. It is about protecting our communities. It is about protecting consumers from oil price volatility and oil's monopoly. And it is about our industrial competition. China and other countries are way ahead. And if we are not creating ambitious policy on transportation electrification, we're going to fall further and further behind every day. And that's going to make us, in a really vulnerable position when transportation costs are such a big part, and oil are such a big part of our economy.
Ben, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. We need to discuss this kind of stuff more often on the channel. But right now, let's focus on what our viewers can do to get involved, what steps they can do to actually let their local elected officials, their statewide elected officials know what's going on, but also to be more proactive in this space.
One is they can go to the Electrification Coalition website. So that's electrificationcoalition.org. And we have action alerts, and you can let your member of Congress know right now that it is the wrong time to be taxing EVs. It is the wrong time to cancel programs that are supporting charging infrastructure growth. It is the wrong time to pull back programs that create incentives that are diversifying the future of our transportation sector. Everyone should want a more diverse transportation sector, and plugging in is one of the best ways that we can scale and do that, so that we aren't so influenced by a war in Iran and oil prices across the globe. And so this is a step we can take that's going to protect the future of our children, protect businesses, protect consumers, and especially at a time when a lot are really struggling. So go to the Electrification Coalition website, reach out to your member of Congress. The other part is, I think that there's more that we can do to focus on the broad benefits of transportation electrification and really build it as a bipartisan issue. And it's just unfortunate that it got so caught up in political division, but it is really about technology that works right now, that's going to save people money. The total cost of operation is cheaper over time. It is faster. 100% torque at 0 RPM. You can go really fast. They are quiet. You can plug it in your garage. And so it's like great technology that everyone else across the world is doing. And so we really need to make sure we center those arguments around this technology transition and competing globally and oil's monopoly on our transportation system.
Ben, thanks again for joining me to help explain all of these legislative developments and for helping our audience find the information they need to let their elected officials know what the true impact of these changes could be if this bill passes unmodified. If you'd like to find out more about the Electrification Coalition and its work in the EV space, there are links in the description below, including resources to help you become an active participant in the process. And thank you for watching to the end. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments whether any of the provisions we discussed today surprised you and whether you think your local elected officials would support or oppose the legislation as it currently stands. If you spot any corrections, please let me know too. Remember to keep the conversation civil, and also remember that your opinions aren't always the only valid ones. We are 100% independent, and if you'd like to help us stay that way, there is a link in the description to support us on Patreon from just $1.50 a month, joining the long and growing list of amazing supporters right here who make the channel possible. You can also send a one-off tip on Ko-fi or pick up some merch from our store, like the t-shirt I'm wearing under this. And please do hit subscribe, though fair warning, YouTube won't reliably notify you anymore when we publish. Yes, we are being actively shadow banned, so make sure you also follow us on social media. You can find us on Mastodon, or you can find us on Discord or Fluxer. Thanks for watching, thanks for being part of the positive change we need to see in the world, and until next time, keep evolving.